For this month's episode, I had the chance to talk with Pastor Joy Johnson, who is the founding pastor of Higher Hope Christian Church and the founder and director of Life Matters Incorporated. I got to know her through Sacramento Area Congregations Together, which is an interfaith coalition of faith leaders and members of their congregations working for real change and investment in our communities here in Sacramento. Pastor Joy and I talked about her work as a pastor to the people in her neighborhood, and I learned about her passion for ministry that does not stay behind the walls of a church, but works to heal the deep wounds of trauma among the people in her community. We talked about faith that is active for the sake of making a difference in the places where we live and work. I am grateful to have Pastor Joy as a strong woman faith leader and colleague in ministry. Her work inspires me, and I hope it will inspire you too. Well, joining me today for Sacramento is Pastor Joy Johnson, the founding pastor and senior pastor of Higher Hope Christian Church, and also the CEO of Life Matters, Inc., and transitioning former president, or still acting president, but we'll be handing the baton over to a new president in January of Sacramento Area Congregations Together, which is how I got to know you and how I got to invite you to join me here for this podcast. So Pastor Joy, welcome, and thanks for sitting down with me.
Thank you very much, Amy. I'm so glad to be asked to chat with you today. Sacramento is my favorite subject.
Oh, good.
I love the city. I love the city of Sacramento, and so to be a part of this Sacramento is a joy. Mm-hmm.
Now, are you a native Sacramentan, or did you come from somewhere else?
I'm actually not a native. I am from Oklahoma, a small town in Oklahoma, Snyder, Oklahoma, but I have lived here. I met my husband here, married 42 years, have raised my children, grandchildren, and so many adopted nieces, nephews, godchildren, until I can't even number them. And I have to say that I fell immediately in love with Sacramento when I came. You know, I'm not sure if it's I think it might be the climate, because the climate is somewhat, at that time anyway, climate has changed, but
right.
At that time it was very reminiscent of the climate in which I grew up, where you knew all of the seasons. You could see all of the seasons of the year, but I love this city. But
they weren't too extreme, right?
Right.
I come from New York, so I do kind of miss the winter cold, but it is nice that it isn't super cold here, but
right. Yeah.
Well, would you that's by way of introduction where you came from, but can you introduce yourself in whatever way is meaningful? Maybe talk about your work, or fill in some of the gaps, obviously, of those sort of titles I outlined for people, but what does that mean to you, and how would you introduce yourself?
Thank you so much. I am a local pastor here, and that I like to always note, because there aren't a lot of women senior pastors. I come from a long line of Christian leaders, though, and Christian women leaders. My grandmother really, she really pastored the church I grew up in, but never got a chance to wear the title, right?
Right. As so many, for centuries, and maybe even since Jesus' time, right? That's been true, but
right. And so I just followed kind of in her footsteps and grew into my own calling. I'm a former registered nurse, and I was a nurse for 20 years before going back to school, theological seminary, and getting my degree in seminary. I have been pastoring here in this city. I celebrated 37 years last October, and had a great splash of that. I've been serving at the local level and have led 3 churches and planted the one that I'm at right now. And just recently, like you said, you and I have met because of the work I've done in social justice, which is leading Sacramento Area Congregations Together. And that is an organization in the city that's made up of, it's a multi-faith, multi-ethnic organization that's made up of 62 and growing, 62 different groups, congregations, and clubs. And our major focus is racial equity. We're not necessarily a political organization, but we are an organization that collaborates around moral and just movements, moral and just actions. And we support certain legislation that would bring about equity in underserved communities. And so while we are multi-faith, we look for the common entity that all faiths seem to have, and that being what is the best for the human condition, whoever the human being is, what serves that human condition best. And so we're able to move some legislation at times that really wouldn't get moved otherwise. And I've enjoyed it. As you noted, I've been leading it from the front, the presiding part for about 7 years, but I've been a part of Sacramento Act for about 11 years. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's been the most meaningful thing about it? Is there a particular action or moment or?
I think the most meaningful, all of it is so rich. But I would say for me personally, the most meaningful moment was probably when we carried out a demonstration down at the border during the time of separation of parents and children. It was very moving, very meaningful. We went there to the border of California, while there were other borders that were, where demonstrations were being held. Sure. But it was a prison down there, detention center, I should say, where the parents of the kids were being held. Mm. And we did a demonstration where we walked from one of the cathedrals, one of the churches that we congregated at, and then walked over, which was probably about 3 miles. We drove over and then walked from the buses. And as we were walking along the fence, we could hear the moms, and I just have a heart of a mom because I am the mother of 3 children. I'm also the eldest of 12. So I've really been raising, yes.
Big sister and mother.
Right. But we could hear the mothers crying on the other side, crying out and saying, "Where are my kids? Where are my children?" In their own language. Because there was a point when we were walking around the building where those who were leading told us, just be very quiet, because I can hear them. And so we could listen and hear their voices. And then we had an interpreter that told us what they were saying. Yeah. And I tell you, it was just so moving because although there were thousands of us, and our feet would normally make a lot of noise, but because we went silently, we went silent for that period of time, it was a connection that was made. Yeah. And I think that was truly one of the most moving experiences that I have ever had while leading Sacramento Act. Yeah. One other situation that comes near is that when we were in Philadelphia for a convention, we always make demonstrations. We're always marching. We're always making, making public what the needs are. We're bringing attention to the needs. And at that time, it was about mass incarceration. And so we marched down to one of the jails, not prison, but one of the jails there in Philadelphia. And we were standing outside, and it was multi-story, probably, I'd say 12 stories high. And we had congregated right out front and started to pray for a few moments, and then we're going to march on. Well, before too long, the prisoners heard us outside praying because we had a megaphone or something like that. And they began to tap on the windows. And once again, there was such a connection that we had with those who were suffering. That human connection was palpable, right?
Yeah, wow.
You could literally feel it. And that same thing is what I'm saying. I felt anyway when we were down at the border, is that those who are in need and those who are suffering, they know when someone is advocating on their behalf, and there's such a response that it goes beyond, I believe, Amy, it goes beyond just rhetoric or just acting just to act. It really is a sort of a sacred connection and a sacred moment. So
yeah, it's so hard for us as, people of faith. We preach every week, right? And sometimes, often, I'm sure this may be true for you too, right? I'm preaching to myself as much as to others, right? But it's hard sometimes, like you said, there's theoretical preaching, or we're trying to urge people and encourage them to live out their faith. But then those moments where it actually becomes real, are really moving. And of course, those stories are heartbreaking for the mothers and the families that are separated, and even those who are imprisoned and left, sort of just dehumanized, right? And so walking along with them or accompanying them, visiting them, humanizes these systems that are not meant, that's not what they're meant to do, to humanize. They're set up to dehumanize.
Yeah. And so much of what goes on in our everyday lives is just the dismissing, because we don't see it, it's right. I mean, again, like the one down at the border is so far removed. You're not just going to drive by and see it. Right. The one in the heart of downtown in Philadelphia, it's there, but we just drive by real fast, right? And so this kind of suffering, this kind of hardship, this kind of dehumanizing is one that makes people invisible. It erases them from our consciousness. And I would say the greatest thing about the work that I'm winding up is the knowing, the opportunity to know that I'm seeing people who are not regularly seen, and I'm touched by the fact that they know we see them. You know what I mean? That, okay, you're incarcerated, and of course you are helped by the fact that somebody is seeing you. But I'm saying those of us who are doing the seeing actually get a sense of the depth of the divine in that moment, right? Because there's a power that's in that moment that is not found anyplace else.
Well, it strikes me that even in telling the story, right, you said you had to quiet yourselves, right? Because we can, and it's metaphorical for how we receive news. Like, we've all heard about these stories, and we feel bad,
right?
We don't know what to do, right? So sometimes we just feel hopeless, and helpless, like, I don't know what to do, But you actually had to be intentional about listening and seeing, right? Because, like you said, with walls between us, we can drive by.
Yeah.
And there's plausible deniability, right?
Right.
But it also strikes me, as you said, it's easy too to be like, oh, we can help these poor people, right? Like, there's a patronizing sometimes that happens too, or we serve to serve, but do we serve to be blessed by them, just as they are as human beings, and that human interaction that happens. Right.
Because now going back to the mothers crying out there in detention at the border, listening and really hearing their voices. I mean, I didn't even really understand the language because they were speaking in their own native tongue, but I did understand the cries of a mother, and I felt that with them. So it was really an enjoining. It was really a connecting, it truly was. And I think that is the Lord's work too, is that we would be so concerned about what is going on with our brothers and sisters until we literally can feel some of that pain. maybe all of it. You know, I'm the eldest of 12 children. And I tell you, my brothers and sisters, every one of us are extremely different from the other. We are, you'd not put us together. We're extremely different from one another. But when any one of them suffer, I suffer with them, you know, and I believe that too is divine. You asked me before we got into this talk, you know, my thoughts on what's happening in our nation now. I believe that our nation has become so calloused and divided toward one another because we really cannot identify one another. We cannot look at one another and see the other as my brother or my sister. But when I brought this up, when I have brought this up in other dialogues, that you are my sister or he is my brother, there are those theological perspectives that have concluded that only certain people are my brother and only certain people are my sister. And my personal pushback on that is that if I can distinguish who is my brother or who is my sister, that means I'm also distinguishing who is not my brother and not my sister. And then that means I have no obligation.
Right.
I don't have a sense of obligation to care about those whom I have concluded are somewhere other than in my circle of brother and sisterhood. Right? Yeah. There's a really, I mean, you know, we go, I mean, these dialogues go back and forth with me because there's a real problem with that. There's a real problem with us not seeing one another as brother and sister. The joy of working in Sacramento ACT is that I did get a chance to, I got the opportunity to work with people of all faiths, and I kid you not, I have some deep residing connections, brotherly and sisterly connections with people who are not of the same faith as I am. Because we've walked together for 7 years and we've, you know, and I've learned things about, I learned things about their faith, but in learning the things about their faith, which is different than mine, it didn't take away.
Right.
It didn't take anything away from mine. In fact, it drove me deeper into knowing, you know, mine in a different way.
I think, you know, I always think the opposite of faith is not like doubt or maybe even disbelief, right? The opposite of faith is fear. You know, why you have little faith, why are you afraid, right?
Why are you afraid?
And
Absolutely.
I think that's, you know, it does astonish me, like more conservative religious people, I think, of any tradition, right? There's a very, like, a closing off and saying, these are the elect or these are the sisters and brothers, right? Which means we draw the walls. I mean, we think we're listening to God, right? Like it's done presumably faithful, right? They think they're being faithful, right? But it's really fear-based, right? And especially, like, I even have an aunt who is of a more conservative Christian tradition, and there is this fear of, like, you know, well, we can't talk to Muslims, or we can't, like, and it's like, well, if your faith is so weak that you can't hear about someone else's, you know, and not be diminished. I mean, it's not like you're gonna, I mean, you can agree on some places and disagree on others, but it doesn't mean you're gonna erode your faith, or else, you know, then there's a bigger problem, I think. But
Right. And even with my biological brothers and sisters, we don't agree on everything, but we are still brothers and sisters.
Right.
You know,
and you don't get to choose, right?
You don't get to, like, okay, you're no longer my brother because you believe it, because you did, or, you know, whatever it is. And for me, I think that we have gone far, far, far too far in that place of making some distinctions about who my brothers and who my sisters are, and who they are not. And so now we are in the practice of erasing people and erasing their need erasing their suffering, you know, and
shutting out their voices. So
shutting out their voices, and it makes us a very calloused nation.
Yeah. We were, we have a racial justice team at St. John's, and we're trying to understand better our white privilege as a generally white, not totally white, but a congregation at least that is Euro descent and has long been in the white privilege. And so we're trying to understand that. And one thing that we say, we try and share with the congregation as we're learning, is theologically, if we believe all humans are made in the image of God, if we don't see all of them and hear all their story, or seek to understand all their stories, then we're not going to know about God. Like, if we want to know God in God's fullness, then we actually have to seek to know as many people, of different cultures, and and so it really does diminish us. We don't see it, or we don't realize it, because we can go about our lives, we think unscathed, right? But then we're not knowing fully who God is.
Right. Very narrow impression of who God is, because then you either have to conclude, you either have to accept that we're all made in God's image, or you have to conclude, oh, some of you were not made by God, or maybe you were made by mistake. Right. And so, and then I like you said, I agree. I think there's a missing of the richness of God's creativity and God's appreciation for diversity, because I believe that there is value in, well, again, back to my family, which I can never talk long without talking about my brothers and sisters. The strength of us, the strength of our survival, the strength of I have one brother who paints and draws in such a phenomenal way, and he just taught himself. Another sister who can sew and make clothing as though it's been made. I mean, these are characteristics, and now I don't have all of that, right?
But you have other gifts, right? So
I have other characteristics, right? But these are characteristics that were nurtured because of our diversity, not because of our sameness.
Right.
Yeah, and so anyway,
So this past year has been a difficult one. There's all kinds of memes about it. What 2020 can be compared to, but I wonder, can you talk a little about the community that you serve, both your church community and then with your, the Life Matters Incorporated? What are those communities like, and how has 2020 and all that it's brought, the pandemic, the new, a reawakening to racial injustice in our country, and this contentious election, like how have those things impacted your community?
Well, Life Matters is a social service organization that we are housed in 6 different apartment complexes throughout the city. We provide life skill development, which includes basic computer skills, after school programs for children, academic enrichment, where we help them with their homework. And then I do healing circles, which mostly are with women, and it's aimed at healing the trauma, neighborhood and community trauma that we all suffer. And so everything that we have done up until 2020 has been in building community tables, gatherings. Even our church service, of course, is a gathering. Well, since March, we have not been able to gather, but we have gone completely online, virtually. And so we still do, in fact, I held a healing circle on last night where we had, I think we had 18 at the height of the meeting, women. A lot of these women are mothers whose sons have been killed either by police shooting or gang violence. probably half of them have lost a child to gun violence of one sort or another. And then the other half are likely mothers of some of the perpetrators. So we do a lot of deep spiritual healing in those moments that are hard to describe. All I have to do is create the safe space and encourage the opening, and then it just flows. It really does. It really does. And so the women who come on a regular, they are committed to working together, to collaborating with one another to try and heal the neighborhood. Try and make the parks. Just recently in August, we had a shooting of a 9-year-old, a drive-by shooting of a 9-year-old. And our group of women were the first ones on the scene after the notice went out. And we were first notified because one of the members of our group is the auntie who had taken the little girl to the park. Right, she was taking her daughter and her niece to the park. So I mean, it's a troubled area in which I minister. It is a troubled area, but it is also, and I always want to make sure people know that those who live in the area are working to make a difference. They are intentional about pulling the support of one another together to not just turn our neighborhood over to this kind of violence and crime. And so we've been recognized for a lot of the healing that has occurred in our community. One of the apartment complexes, because all of our apartment complexes serve children, and one of them has been noted in magazines for turning around the life of that community, the life of that apartment, because before we came, children were not able to go outside and play because there was always some danger going on. The shooting I just spoke to you about, it happened away from the apartments. It happened at a park, but before we came, it used to be on the regular, there was shootings. And so kids didn't get to go outside and play. Yeah. Within 2 years of us being on the site, and we've been doing this now 10 years, within 2 years of us being on site, the apartment complex became much safer. Yeah. And so children now have a place to play and those kinds of things are what we attest to. But it's an ongoing work. It doesn't end, because as soon as you clean up one corner, something breaks out on the other corner. We collaborate. Go ahead.
It just sounds, it sounds like such hard but beautiful. Like there's beauty there in the people. I mean, to say that your women respond, the group of women were the first responders, right? Just members of the community to surround a family or to be present in the midst of a tragedy is really powerful.
Yeah. And we collaborate with an organization of men, called Brothers to Brothers, and they attempt to do the same thing. Some of them, as some of the women, have been in trouble with the law before, and they are interested now in doing whatever they can to keep the next generation from going down that same path, right? And so this is the work that I do, and this is very rewarding to me, and I'd like to do this until I die, right? Yeah. So it's not like it's not necessarily in a cathedral, we all come together. Now we still do some coming together, right? Well, when the COVID's not here, but
it's different coming together now.
Right. But the real work that calls me is not the pulpit on Sunday. I've done a lot of that and can still do that, but it really is what is calling me is in the streets. Doing one-on-one, hand-to-hand, healing circles. The young lady whose niece was killed a few weeks ago is allowing me, and I say that because it's not easy for you to let somebody in when you're in that much pain, but she's allowing me to walk with her through the grief and the journey that she has to be on right now to come through. Because it's a very hard journey. And so for me, Amy, I do realize that not every preacher is called to this level of engagement, but there has to be some of us who can get down into those areas, because these are not people who, after such a great loss, that they're going to come into a building with 60, 70, or 700 other people, or 1,000 other people, and worship in the traditional way.
Yeah.
Right. And because our society is so broken, and we're doing such atrocious things to one another, there needs to be those who I call the wound healers, who can really get down in there. And I'm not saying, as I said, I'm not saying everybody has to do it, and I'm not minimizing those who can't, but I would like my voice to call forth those who say, I have something in me to do, and I just can't see it inside the institutional.
Right.
Yeah. You very well could find your place. Right.
Yeah. Well, and in a way, I'm hopeful, or cautiously optimistic. Hopeful, I guess, is a more faithful language, but or word to choose. But that with COVID-19 and the pandemic, it kind of is a reminder that the church is not the building, right? Because I know at St. John's we haven't been gathering in our building since March 15th, right?
Right.
And so to remind people, like, you are the church in the world, and like you're saying, not everyone is gifted, for each kind of work, but each of us is gifted for some kind of work in the world, not just behind the walls of a church, and it is a particular gifting to be able to bear someone else's trauma in that way, and stand with them, right, and hold, so much, but sometimes it does just take also encouraging and exhorting, right? Like St. Paul would write letters like, okay, can't just keep doing the same things you've been doing, and so, so maybe someone will hear your encouragement and say, maybe I could. Do you think some of your medical training and you work with like trauma victims in medical training and I think that two things prepared me for, and I don't want it to sound like I'm that prepared. I am, you never know what's going to come your way.
Right. I am just a faithful sister following God. But I do think two things prepared me to have the backbone for it. And one is my nursing. The other is being the eldest of 12 children. And so I'm not I'm not one that shocks easily. I find that to do this particular work, all I have to do is something you just said a moment ago, is look at people and see the image of God in them. I don't care what they look like. I still see the image of God in them. Yeah. That's one thing. And the second thing is all I have to do is to create safe and sacred space around them. In the moment, just create that safe and sacred space where they know I'm listening. I'm not just listening with these ears, I'm listening with my heart. And the answer really bubbles up from within them. When you successfully create that and are not shocked by who they are or what they look like or how they smell or whatever. But looking for the image of God and trying to create a safe and sacred moment. And so nothing will interrupt this moment. And so, you know, this young lady in particular, whenever we are together, she can cuss and, you know, she can say what, and that she does, but this is still our sacred moment, right? And nothing is gonna shake me off of that for this time. And so, and that's very healing for people who are not seen, people who are not heard, people who just feel like that life has thrown them away. That is very healing. And so, and
I think people of faith and maybe faith leaders particularly, but I don't want to discount lay people, you know, because they also are to be about the business of God in the world. But, you know, when you stand in as a faith leader for people that may feel like their lifestyle is, you know, they might feel shame, or they might feel like, well, God would never look at me because I'm, you know, whatever, you know, all the things that they think their vices, their whatever. But then to be able to stand in and say, lay it on me and not be shocked, you know, right? No reaction. It's like, okay, like, I really thank you for sharing that story with me, you know, and because they expect that we'll be shocked and chastise them or say, well, you know, God doesn't like when you do that, or say, you know, but just being able to hold it and say, okay, thank you for your story.
It doesn't take a preacher to do it. It doesn't take, you know, again, it's late. In fact, this is the way I disciple the women in our group and the women, you know, the church, is that you can be that same sacred, caring space for somebody else. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Now, it's not for everybody. So, you know, you need to deal with your own stuff first, right? But that's what discipleship looks like over in my world. And then to your point, you asked me about this year, 2020 and the pandemic. I really do believe, you know, I'm not a one who believes that God has punished us and sent this upon us, but I believe that there is a grace-filled element to it, in that there's a reshaping of us. You mentioned a moment ago, reshaping of us and our perspectives of what church is, what worship is, what faith is, because now that we've been forced out of the buildings, we've discovered that our faith was really kind of tied up and wrapped up in a building. And here we have the opportunity now to discover what does faith look like without a building.
Yeah.
And I say, what me like included, I would say that what has happened is my faith has been driven deeper and broader because of those restrictions and restraints that have befallen us. And as we read all throughout the Bible, there were plagues and different things that came, droughts and whatnot, that really challenged the people of God. And out of each one of those, their faith was further deepened and was designed to go through again and go through more. So I think that when we come out of the public restraints, we have the opportunity to be different. We have
not snap back to just what we were doing. Not snap back,
right. And then this election, well, I tell you, I don't know. I think that there is so much wrong with our political system, but these 4 years have been a real, for me, an African-American woman, these 4 years have been a real test, a push. There has been some benefit that I think many might say, some might not agree, but I think that all in all, as bad as it was to have someone who was as ill prepared to lead our nation, it shook some of us awake out of our slumber. You know, we were, I believe, taking a lot for granted. We were not so pressed and driven to unite and to resolve some of the issues ourselves, to move in a collaborative way, collective way. We had so as a result of going through this long 4-year drought of clear, sound, moral leadership, I believe that we've had to become more mature. We've had to grow up and not act like adolescents who just assume everything is going to be just fine. We can't assume anything. We understand that now. Yeah. And I hope, again, that once we get into a new administration,
right,
hopefully we don't slip right back to, oh, well, they got that. That's all covered.
Well, it feels like, I think a lot of our politics has been, elect the right person that will solve all these problems, right? And I think that even, this election, the previous one, and maybe then also like 2000, right? Like where there were all these like right down the middle and we're so divided, like so clearly like divided by a hair of like, like no one's clearly winning, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Kind of shows us that we aren't really sure who can lead us, but we want someone who's just going to take the responsibility away from us, right? Like, so, and it gets so fraught because like we feel like if this person doesn't get in, then my hopes are totally dashed, and then others on the other side feel the same, and it's like, well, these are just people that we elect, and they're really the current president, right? Whether you like him or don't, or but it's like he's not. He's sort of a symptom of a greater problem, right? Or if we see issue with the administration, it's a symptom of a bigger problem. It's not that person exactly.
It's not that one.
Right. And so, I think there's so much healing that needs to be done. And I think this is where, and maybe you could speak to this a little bit, and this is in part, I think, the work of SAC Act 2, but I think faith leaders and faith community we've sort of been pushed to the margins, and we've let ourselves, right? Like instead of being out in the front, proclaiming our message and saying we have a different way, we've allowed others to sort of take the megaphone and take, and I think we have a lot to say.
Right.
So I wonder if you would reflect on that a little, and what do you think?
Yeah,
is the role of faith communities in politics or in political action?
Yeah, well, I do think that we have allowed the nation, the church community, the church leadership have allowed the nation to go its own way, because we've built sort of these fortresses that I spoke of earlier, where we're all inside and we're good, right? We're good, even if it is a pie in the sky kind of good, like it's going to be good when we get to heaven or whatever, but we're inside. And those are the people out there doing all the craziness. But that has led to what we see now is that things are going awry because we pulled ourselves out of the world. And there is, again, theological differences about the fact that that leaves the world on its own, but the world going down the tubes, so does the church. And it takes away any sense of the church having power, having influence that can make a difference. My study of Jesus is that he was always engaged with the culture that was present at the time he walked the earth. And he was speaking to the culture about a different way. And, I won't get a lot of amens from some of my brothers and sisters about this, but that is the Jesus I follow. I often say, I'm one who wants to go and do what Jesus did. I know that I have a lot of colleagues, a lot of clergy friends who want to say what Jesus said. I want to say what he said too, but I really would rather do more of what he did. And when I look at his life was one that was speaking to the culture and speaking about going a different way. Not only was Jesus doing that, so were all of the prophets. They were engaged with the culture, with the world around them, and reminding the world around them there is a different way, and this is not what you've been set up to do. So yes, you're right. Sacramento Act is that's their primary mission, is to be the moral voice, of coming from all faiths, be the moral voice that speaks to the world around us, that says this that you're doing, the cabinet that you're building or whatever you're building is not moral. It is amoral. And we want just moral leadership. Yeah.
And I think faith communities, we have tools at our disposal that we don't use, and even language that I think can be really helpful, like language of repentance and reconciliation, and even sin as that brokenness, right? That state that we're in that we can't escape, but because it's our human condition, right? But I think one of the other ones that is powerful to me is lament. And earlier talking about the pandemic, right? I think for me it's interesting how the whole world is going through this, right? And rarely, if ever, do we have anything that we feel like we're all going through, right? But our texts in the Bible are of a community suffering all the same thing, right? Experiencing it maybe differently as individuals, but they're called together in community to lament and to turn back, right? Instead of this personal responsibility, like, well, I didn't do anything, so I don't have to, right? It's no, we're all in this. And, and I think, 2020 also, it's been happening for a long time, for hundreds, if not, more than that, years, racial injustice, right? And, but we woke up again, and it felt a little different. I don't know if it felt different to you, and maybe you could speak about that after the murder of George Floyd. It seemed like, well, we've seen many, unfortunately, Black people lose their lives at the hands of authorities and law enforcement. But it felt different. And, SAC Act, one of the things we did was an event called From Lament to Hope. And I know you shared your story as well as others, and I was grateful for that. But can you talk maybe about those things, about the event maybe, and what, I know we're calling it a spiritual action, right? Not a political action, although we did deliver the 10 Commandments for dismantling systemic racism and affirming the rights and dignity of Black, Brown, and Indigenous or Native peoples to the Capitol, right? So there was a political move or confronting the political systems. But yeah, can you speak about that event From Lament to Hope and why you think it was so important for us to do?
Yeah, well, I think that the George Floyd murder was a pivot point. And primarily, I think it was because we had all been shut in for some months, being still, perhaps moving to even more sacred places. And suddenly everybody sees this murder broadcast on air. And I think that if America could do anything to start the healing that is necessary, America would have to go into a very prolonged lament.
Yeah.
I don't, so I don't feel that necessarily that our acting out a lament was sufficient at all, but I think it was set to serve as a pattern to say there is so much to mourn and so much to lament about. And until there's some admitting that white supremacy has injured and continues to injure day after day after day, people of color. And until white America, well, all of America, but certainly white America comes to deal with that, we're just going to be running around in circles, is my belief. I have spent at least 10 years prior, up until 2015, so started in 2005, working on what I was calling racial reconciliation, where I was personally engaged with, I'd say 10, 12 brothers mostly, maybe a couple of women, but male clergy in this city, Black and white, with intentionally working on racial reconciliation. That meant we were meeting and we were talking and we were walking and we were marching and all of that. And these were all Christian. Brothers and sisters. But then something happened in 2000. Oh, it was the Michael Brown killing. And it became real clear to me that while we were using some of the same language, we had very different meanings. And right after the election in 2016, it became real clear that, you know what, we're on different paths. And until we can get racial healing, we can't get racial reconciliation. I believe that the healing has to start with lamenting, admitting and lamenting over what has happened. So since that time now, I've been working more on, this is my personal work with colleagues. I've been working more on Black liberation with only Black clergy to help us rediscover what is the Black church and what can the Black church of tomorrow be. Because we've got to heal from some of the trauma too. And so that lament to hope was an attempt to move the needle to a place of let's start the healing. Okay, let's start the healing. And then there were others who of course, wanted to, and needfully so, wanted to make a statement to the elected officials about what part they need to play in that healing. So to me, the lament is an element of healing. It's like a birthing that, has to start with some weeping and some mourning and some crying about what has been. But you got to admit what has been, because if not, what has been will continue to be, right? Yeah. So it's been a journey, Amy. It's been a journey, and it's not over. It's not over. Just the mention of George Floyd, it brings me pain, because I know that we have not. I think there are some people who felt like they woke up when the George Floyd murder happened, and they started getting involved with the demonstration and that kind of stuff, and they were, applauding Black Lives Matter, but it was like so many other things. It was a passing phase, and the kind of lament that this nation needs is probably about 60 or 90 days of lamenting over what,
at least, right? Yeah, I mean,
at least that, because it's going to take that long for everybody to get, to get on board with the fact that there is a contribution. One, there's a contribution you've made in this white superior model, and there's a contribution you can make to tearing it down. There is a contribution you can make to tearing it down. So
do you have any words of, I don't know if it's wisdom. I don't want to put you on the spot to teach us anything. That's not what I'm asking. But I wonder, as a white pastor in, like I said, a predominantly white church, like, how do we not let this be a passing thing? And where can we maybe best engage with the voices we need to hear in order to keep this lament, or to even begin this process of lament? Like, what are some thoughts or considerations, at least, that you would give us?
Well, that's hard. I mean, I could say, I would say to you, the leadership, I think that you need to keep before yourself and your people a sense of privilege. Don't want you to use that word because that's a buzzword. That's a trigger word. But, I know,
but we're running out of words, because then and then we say, oh, we can't use that one now, right? I know it.
Right. But because it is predominantly white, you've got to, because most of the time I'm in a dialogue with 3 white women and 3 Black women, and we're trying to work on. So I am still working with the ladies, the girls. Okay. and so one of the things that they said is that we find it hard. As a white person, they were saying we find it hard to know what white is, because our conversations are always, tell us about your. To the Black women, tell us about your childhood. Tell us about your first day at school. Tell us about when you first da. Okay. And so when we tell those stories, and it's great, it gives us opportunity. We talk about our Blackness. We talk about what we value in our race. They can't talk about what they value in their race. If you can lead your congregation to start to know that they are white, what it means to be white.
Right.
And I don't know how to tell you how to do that, but that's
our work.
Beginning. Great beginning. What does it mean to be white? Right. and most of the time people are like, I don't, that's not, you know what I mean? So they back away from that very elementary question. They back away from that.
Yeah. We just finished a book read. It was like, I don't know, 20 weeks or something. We did one the year before, so this was already on the schedule, but we read the book Waking Up White, and it was interesting because we had like almost 30 people from the church. And I think the unfortunate reality is that the death of George Floyd it then created an interest in people, which, I guess is good, but people have to lose their lives for that to rise up in people. But we had 30 or so people engaged in this. So they did have to confront that for the first time, because white people it's like white people aren't white, right? Like we mark that on the census or, but we don't talk about it, right? Because it's like, well, we don't have to, right? And so it's hard, and it's a hard work to be like, oh, how did I get into this category, or what does it even mean? And, and language like white supremacy is like, wait, I'm not a white supremacist, but it's like, so changing that, saying like, well, yeah, but we've been part of this culture of whiteness as like the superior thing, and what does that mean?
Whiteness as the norm. That's what my lady says. Yeah. I'm not white. I'm just normal.
Right.
And so everybody else is abnormal. So getting that kind of, built in, that would help so much, because this understanding has got to spread. Yeah. Right.
And there is no quick fix, like you said.
There is no
ongoing. It's an ongoing.
Yes.
Not linear. Like you have to keep going back.
Right.
And messing up, and then saying, okay, I messed up. And so I thank you for talking about that, and that lament to hope as a pattern, but we need to keep, right? Because we always want to fix, like, okay, it's done now, right? Like we talked about it, and
right. Yeah.
Well, one last question, just so we can end on a hopeful note, is what does bring you hope? We went from lament, so let's get the hope piece. What gives you hope in these difficult times? And
I have to bring back my healing circle of women. They bring me so much hope because there's so much power and strength in there. In fact, last night, one of the things we discussed was, one of the ladies had we were talking about what everybody had to do was go around the room and say thank you for something. And one of the ladies said, I'm thankful for, my kids who are coming home or something like that for a holiday, or can't come home for the holiday. I don't know what it was. But in saying so, she felt like she had misspoken because there was someone on the call whose son who was killed. He can never come home. And so she apologized for that. But the mother of the son who is dead said, no, don't ever apologize, because I lived through you. He lives through your kids. And so that brings me hope when we can live through one another. Even you're asking me to come and talk to you, Amy, that gives me hope. You know what I mean? And I had to change the date so many times and you still hung on.
That's all right. I mean, I was just so thankful you made time. I know we're all so busy, and this pivoting of how to do things and, do what we have done in new ways and creative ways is, it adds more work, not less. And so thank you so much. So and this conversation has brought me hope too. So I am thankful. And I look forward to deepening our relationship and my relationship with Sec Act. I'm relatively new, and I've not gained the momentum that I want. So I'm committed to being more involved and connecting with other faith leaders. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Amy. God bless you.
You're welcome. You too.